for that introduction. Yes, I'm going to be speaking about putting your platform on a diet. Oh, is it going on? All right. So just a little bit I'm not going to spend much on the introduction, but many of you know me from OpenCredo. OpenCredo has been rebranded as Trifork. So if you see Trifork all over the slides, that is where I'm coming from. I might interchange Trifork and OpenCredo, but many of the examples I'm going to give are from my days at OpenCredo. Right. So I want to start off with a bit of a question. When did you last actually delete or deprecate anything from your platform? And if the answer to that is nothing or never, then you might want to think about whether your platform is bloating, and you might need to think about putting it on a diet. But in order to do that, we need to define what the actual problem is and set some context. So, first of all, nobody ever sets out to build a bloated platform. They generally want to start with something lean, often the thinnest viable platform, which can maybe just be a wiki page, but more often than not for organizations, it's building an actual platform, an internal developer platform in order to scale. And often the goal is to move fast, but without having the sort of unnecessary complexity that comes with trying to build everything up front. And they often start out really well. However, as all of us know, platforms tend to evolve, and then they gather with them like moths to a flame, all these additions, tools, processes, and over time that becomes problematic, especially if it isn't actually actively planned or sort of pruned over time. This can cause your platforms to bloat. So every new addition can move your platform from being one that is helpful to one that starts becoming a bit of a hindrance. Now you may ask, like, where can this bloat accumulate? Most people would say, oh, it happens in the tools section, but actually it can happen in a few different places. It can happen in your processes, it can happen in your services as well. And something which people maybe don't necessarily think is obvious is that it's not just the tooling for the end users that can bloat, it can also be the tooling for your platform engineering team itself as they go about developing the platform in the first place. So that's the problem statement. What's the challenge? So that's pretty much what this talk is going to be about. I want to try and hold up a mirror to you and get you to have a look at your platform and see whether maybe over the winter months it's gathered a little bit more extra weight and whether you need to put it on a bit of a diet. So let's begin by exploring what are some of the signs of bloat, or what are the observations that you might see in your platform to indicate that you have a bit of a problem. Now, some of these are going to be obvious, some are going to be more subtle. But all of them, I'd say, are sort of indicators of where you could have a challenge. And it's not to say that just because you have one of these that you automatically have bloat, but the more of them that you have, the more likely you are to be having bloat. So these are just a few that I'm going to go through, some of the common ones that I've seen. So the first one is where you have platform teams that are generally fielding constant support queries. So every platform team will generally have some way to be able to track when support issues come in and handle them. But if you've seen an increase in the support cases, even though you're not maybe adding more features or teams, or actually more importantly, you're seeing the same type of support questions come up and up and up over and over and again, this could be an indication to you that your platform has got bloat. So it could be the platform is too complex, that it is not self-service enough, also that it doesn't have enough clarity or is really kind of poorly documented. Now, there may be edge cases, abstractions that are at the wrong level, and you might say to me, well, that doesn't automatically mean that my platform has bloat, and that's correct. But what I would say is that irrespective of the underlying condition, the question you want to ask yourself is your platform accumulating what I would call cognitive overhead? And this is where you're expecting your users to extend more mental effort to be able to use the platform than would otherwise generally be expected. So a good example here is where you have support queries that come in, for example, and they say, there's all these different ways to do CI pipelines. Which one am I supposed to use? Or what is the latest Terraform module that I'm supposed to be using? And this is really a sign that your platform has potentially got too many choices and that it's not clear enough, it doesn't have clear enough defaults for your users. So that's the first one. The second one that also comes up is where you are trying to onboard new engineers and new users. And this is where it's taking longer and longer. So if you see this happening, this could be a suggestion that your golden path is maybe a little bit cluttered, it's a little bit brittle, and maybe not as obvious to your end users as it should be.
If your new joiners are facing a really steep learning curve, this could be because you have bloated tools and processes in the process. And also maybe your documentation has grown organically, but not in a coherent manner. It could be that the exact opposite is happening. So you might have a complete lack of documentation. And this is why I said at the beginning, it's not automatically that if you see these indicators, it's bloat. But again, the question you want to ask in this particular case is your platform adding more friction, and you can read bloat in this instance, than reducing it for your engineers and for your teams that are onboarding? Now, a common example here would be where you have a team or somebody that's trying to onboard and they've got to install 4 CLIs, they've got to clone 3 GitHub repositories, they've got to go to Slack in order to figure out how to do things, all of this before they're able to even commit a line of code. Now, I also just want to say that, remember, everybody is on a journey. And I've spoken before about the platform maturity model. So it's not to say that if you're in this place, it's automatically bad. It may be that that's your starting place and you're trying to smooth that journey out. But if you do find yourself in a position where there is all of these extra things that people are having to do, your platform is potentially bloated, at least in that area. The third one is where you find teams that are just bypassing or completely working around your platform. So this suggests that your platform is no longer serving the use cases as effectively and efficiently as they may have done in the past. So it's maybe perceived now as being slow or outdated, or maybe just the fact that there could be a lot of platform sprawl happening. So it generally indicates a loss of trust in your platform when you see this. And as I say, there could be many reasons, bloat of them being one of them. However, again, the question you want to ask in this case is, are you facing what I would call platform abandonment? So this is where you may have had users before, and the usage was high, but now they're abandoning the platform, and you land up in a position where you're still having to support everything, but the usage has actually gone down. Now, an example of this is where you might have, maybe there's a team that is sort of deploying their own Helm chart because your particular process for being able to deploy things takes 30 minutes. There is some manual steps in the process, and they're just finding it problematic. So that's an example of teams bypassing. The fourth one, and this one is probably maybe a little bit more obvious for people, is where you have multiple tools that are trying to solve the same problem. So this generally suggests, as I say, that you've got multiple tools and that there's no clear guidance. And this is where the problem comes in. So it's the lack of governance and the lack of an opinionated sort of default that it creates too many options for the user, and it becomes a little bit of a free-for-all. So teams then land up optimizing locally, and you land up building things that are far more specific for individual teams rather than understanding what the visibility is for what already exists there. So the bloat indicator here is what I would call choice paralysis. So this is where your users are being provided with too many options, and it's just creating more confusion rather than cohesion in terms of what you're trying to achieve. So a good example here would be where you're trying to, maybe you've got 3 different ways to do pipelines. You've got one team that's using Argo CD, you've got another one that's using Flux, and you've got a third one that is just using some sort of custom scripts. All of them are supported by the platform, but it's not obvious what the preferred option is for you to adopt, and so they don't really know which one to choose. So there's no shepherding and trying to guide them into the right direction. And the final one in the sort of signs of bloat here is where you have new platform features that just aren't really adopted by teams. So in this case, it's an indication that your roadmap is out of sync with what users are actually needing and where their pain points are. So the adoption could be blocked for a variety of reasons. It could be that there is poor discoverability, you don't have a very sort of clear benefits, or just you've got a bad user interface. And again, the indicator here is the dead weight that you may be accumulating. So this is where you find, actually, we've got our platform, but there are many sort of unused features that are being added, and the maintenance burden is going up, but we're not actually delivering any value. So if a specific example in this is where you might be trying to roll out something like a blue-green deployment, or maybe a canary rollout.
And you roll it out for the teams, but then they decide, actually, we're still going to stick with our cube cuttle apply and the way that we currently do it, because the abstraction that you provide is either too confusing or it's too brittle. And the implication of this is that you land up with a platform that is, that's invested in complexity, but it doesn't really solve or see real adoption. All right, so when it comes to potentially or identifying the signs of potential bloat, I think what I'd like to say is that it's not just about the code and how much sort of code and tooling you accumulate. It's also about how much additional friction you add into the process for your users. And these are not just technical problems. They include the frustrations in the processes and the services as well. And they're generally a signal from your internal users that if you listen carefully to them, that there are some areas somewhere in the platform where things are a little bit too heavy or they're a little bit bloated for them to be able to work effectively. All right, so we've got the signs. Let's understand a little bit more about why this happens. So where does it come from and why do platforms tend to bloat? So again, I'm just going to be covering probably about 4 areas here. There are many more, but these are just some that I've seen which cause problems. So the first one is just what I would call a natural evolution of systems. So there is just a natural rhythm to platform development. Things accumulate, you accumulate lots of stuff as you go along. And in the platform's case, this is often an accumulation of decisions and tools that have happened across different teams and across different eras. And the challenge here is when you have people leaving, you have teams reorganizing, you land up with institutional memory that fades, and your ownership gets lost over time. And in this case, you may land up with teams that are re-implementing similar services because they're just not sure how the previous one sort of worked, or they actually don't even know that they're there in some cases. And one of the key reasons for this is when you don't have a good system of recording the decisions that are made. And that's why one of the first tips to help try and address this particular issue is to make sure that you have a good system for being able to record why you have certain services in or not into the system. Now, we are big fans of ADRs, so architectural decision records. And this is, we find a very helpful way to be able to keep a record of, like I say, what services you're putting in, but just as important, the reasons for why you have excluded putting other ones in there as well. Because you don't want somebody coming along and re-implementing the thing that you had a very good reason for not implementing in the first place. Now, you can actually use things like LLMs and stuff now to search those records as well and try and actually find out the reasons for why is this service not there, why did we do X, why did we do Y. And you should revisit them periodically as well to make sure that your reasoning still holds. The second one is where there are good intentions, but they are never revisited. So this often falls into the category of what I would say are generally sort of one-off fixes, and they tend to be where your teams are really trying to help either the developer or the engineering teams to be able to accomplish a goal. But it tends to be implemented as one-off fixes that just never get retired, or it's those proof of concept implementations where management swore to you you'd be able to redo it properly, but it just lands up going straight into production, and then you landed up having to sort of deal with this. Now, this can become, obviously, a challenge sort of moving forward, but that's not the only one. The one that is often maybe not necessarily recognized is when people over-engineer or over-architect the platform. Now, this can happen in a few different ways, but the example I tend to give here is when it comes to non-functional requirements. So everybody has a desire to make sure that the platform is reliable, it's available, all the good things that platforms generally need to do. But it's a noble goal, but the question is, do you really need 5 nines of availability? Just because Google does it, or just because this is what everybody says you should do in your platform, doesn't mean you need to do it. And if you implement 5 nines when you don't really sort of need it, you land up having these good intentions of bloated processes and code to try and keep and sustain a level of support that is not actually something that you need. All right, so how do you address this? Well, in the first instance, I'd say you obviously just be explicit and realistic about the level of support that you do need to actually sort of support. But also when it comes to some of the features that we've spoken about, to actually label and tag them. Is this a long-term service that I'm supporting, or is it a quick fix, so that you can take the time to sort of understand which items are used, which are not, and where the bulk of your support might be going, if it's on quick fixes or actually it is on some of the services that are really making a difference. All right, the third one is what I call DIY or commodity dilemma, also known as the build, buy, or blend option. So this often happens when teams, either for the platform itself or for some of the tools, they either land up on the extreme opposite ends of the I'm going to build it myself, or I'm just going to get a tool in to come and do it for me. So the example of where you build it yourself, where you maybe should have done a commodity option, is when, for example, you're going to run your own Kubernetes clusters. So there are really good cloud providers out there that offer EKS, AKS, all these type of things, and it takes that maintenance burden away from having to do this yourself. Now, if you have to do it yourself, that's fine. But generally, if you try and run these yourself, you just land up creating, again, the bloat around the support and all of the stuff that comes with that, when it could be a much simpler setup for yourself. Now, the opposite also exists, and that is where you choose to implement a tool which is just very generic, but you've actually got quite a specific problem to solve. And in this case, you land up with the other problem where the tool does not bend to your will, and you've got to add a lot of different fixes and changes and bolt it and change it in various different ways to make it do what you want to do. And that in itself also creates bloat to try and make that work. So, tips to address this, I would say generally most people opt for the blend option. They generally aren't on the extreme ends of this spectrum. And also, if you want to try and understand and strategize whether something is a commodity tool or whether it's something you should be building yourself, you can use something like Wardley mapping to be able to help you with that. But the biggest thing I would say is that you want to opt for building composable platform architectures. And this is just generally easier to manage and deal with, but it also can contain your bloat fallout. So if there's different areas of the platform that are having a problem, you can just replace that one particular area rather than having to replace an entire system because you've glued everything so tightly together. All right, and then the final section is around basically where you have a lack of planning or platform vision. Now, as with any platform as a product approach, which we've spoken about over many years and today as well, you need to make sure you have a clear vision about what your platform is and what it is targeting, what it covers, what it doesn't actually cover. So this is key to making sure that you stay on point for the lifetime of the platform and that you build the right thing. Now, if you don't have a clear vision of what you're targeting, you will automatically build the wrong thing and that becomes bloat. If you're trying to support absolutely everybody, so you're trying to support 100% of the use cases, you will also naturally accumulate bloat because generally you only want to focus on the core 80% that does the main thing, and there will be 20% or whatever the percentage is of people that will need to build the platform, need to build services and be able to use something that is not on the platform. So you don't have to actually try and cater for absolutely everybody. Also, if you don't have proper roadmap planning, this means that you are also not engaging your users, you're not getting the feedback, and again, you'll end up building the wrong thing and your platform bloats. A key area here, which isn't called out all that often, is end of life and sunsetting policies. So you need to be quite careful about making sure that you explicitly include this as part of your platform, because otherwise you will just land up accumulating multiple versions time and time again for many things, and you just never retire anything. So there's also product management, which I'll probably talk about that in the next one, actually. But the tips to address this is really to do the exact opposite of where there's a lack of investment. In this case, is actually to invest more heavily in these particular areas. Now, I've added a bonus entry in here. So I wasn't going to put this in, but as I said in the beginning of the talk, it's not necessarily just the users and the tools for the users that can bloat. You can have bloat for the platform engineering team as well. And if you're not careful, you will end up hamstringing your platform team and land up creating and building bloat into the process as a result. So the first sort of challenge here is where the team itself is not protected. And what I mean by that is where you have a lack of product management or product ownership. So if you have multiple people who are all trying to get their services built by the team, and there's just this influx of requirements, and the platform team doesn't know what the priorities are or the decision, they will just land up building everything. And he who shouts the loudest will basically get their particular service built. And this can obviously be quite problematic. So making sure that you have a way to shield your team from being able to do that means that you can choose the right things that need to be implemented. Now, the other one is also not having the right kit. And I'm going to pick on a particular piece of technology here, because I've actually seen it happen in a few cases, and it's the virtual desktop interface, the VDI. Now, I'm not saying that this is, in some cases you have to do this, right? So there's regulatory environments and there are places where you have to do this, but it can be a real bloat killer. And the reason is that often it really creates slow feedback loops. I've never come across anybody who's had a good experience with a VDI. And the services are just labored in terms of building it, and it becomes even to the point sometimes where people are like, I just give up. Like, I'm going to, even this service, I can't build it this way because it's problematic. So my suggestion in this particular case is if you can possibly help it, try not to give your platform engineering teams VDIs and give them the kit that they need to actually do the development. Not always possible, but it is something which, if you can, makes a really big difference. Also, make sure you invest in a platform product owner. If you don't have product management, this is a key thing to make sure that you have that right mindset and that you build, you land up building the right things. Okay, so there are various reasons for our platforms bloating, but underpinning all of them, you will find that wherever there is an absence of either good vision, planning, or pruning, all of your systems will drift towards complexity of some sort, and you need to deal with that. So, as we get into the final stretch, we need to look out and know what the signs are for, we've looked at what the signs are for, now we want to understand how do we address this bloat, or at least how do we fix it if we've got it. So in this section, I'm going to summarize some of the areas that I've already given in terms of some of the tips, but try and bring it together in a way that can help you to address potential bloat or existing bloat that comes up. But the key takeaway point I'd like to say up front is that the more of these that you address early, the better, and the less issues you'll have later down the line. So very much prevention is better than cure in this particular case. All right, so tips for keeping your platform lean. As we've said before, having the right mindset is key to this. So this is a lean mindset, only building the minimum things to start off with. Don't try and boil the ocean. Having a platform as a product mindset, many people have spoken about this, but it really is the key thing to making sure that you listen to your users, that you understand what they need, and you build according to that. You need to know your sort of target audience and the boundaries that you're operating within. And a good example here is also to establish what I would call a platform charter. So this is where you can define, this is what the platform is, this is the focus area that we're focusing on, these are the things we are not focusing on. So when a new requirement comes along, you can go back to your chart and say, does it align with the broad vision and the direction that we're going in? And if not, maybe you shouldn't be building that service or that particular item. So it can be helpful just as a sense check. Then, as I said before, planning, really, really important. Making sure you have a clear roadmap. And this is to define not only the sort of what services and features are coming up, but also what are the areas that are you going to deprecate. So as I said, it's really important to have end-of-life policies and sunsetting policies. You don't, for example, need to have or support all the versions of Kubernetes. Maybe you just want to support the last 2. But you need to have the ability to be able to get rid of stuff from your platform. Otherwise, you will just land up supporting a massive amount of different services and versions, which becomes just too much of a maintenance nightmare to deal with. So there's just, I think I put a link in there, which is just to actually help. I don't know if you've come across this, but we find it quite helpful. It gives you the end-of-life details for various different tools that you may have in your platform as well. And this is something which people also don't necessarily watch out for, and it can become an issue if one of your key tools has actually been deprecated. So you need to be able to look at this, plan it into the roadmap, and tell your users what's happening. Then there's the 80-20 rule. As I say, don't build for absolutely everybody, just the 80% that it makes sense for. The other 20%, let them do their own thing. You don't need to build a platform that covers absolutely everything. Right, and then architecting for evolution. So as I said before, you really want to build composable platform as a product capabilities. And this is where you can make use of things like plugin style architecture. So something like Cratex, I know they've got a stand out there as well. Crossplane, those type of technologies are really good for being able to build up the capabilities in a way that is very modular. And this, as I said, will allow you to swap out different components as you go along. But one of the other key things you can do is to narrow the set of support that you have for the platform modules. So if we go back to an example of you've got Argo CD, you've got Flux, and you've got some custom scripts for your pipelines, you could say that we as a platform team are supporting the Argo CD route, and we've got a module to be able to allow you to do that. This is the shepherded supported path. If you as a team want to use Flux or something, we'll give you the capability to build a module yourself, but then you manage it. So you don't stop the team, but you provide a very opinionated way of going forward and only supporting that from the platform perspective. Good documentation, as I say, make sure you keep track of your decisions, so architectural decision records, track your features and the usages, make sure that you understand what you're using and what you're not using, and you can monitor some of those bloat indicators as well. All right, if you already got bloat and you need to shed it, try and reduce your support service if you can. This is much easier said than done. You can't just go and automatically do these things. However, it is part of a strategy to try and minimize things. So only support a subset of versions and stacks, and try and make sure that you basically shepherd users through the end-of-life policy. For those of you who have built your own logging systems out there, you really don't need to. Try and shift away from do-it-yourself implementations to something that is more commodity where it makes sense. It really will help to reduce a lot of the complexity, the maintenance, and also the frictional bloat all in one go when you do that for some of your tools. So to recap, prevention is better than cure, and you want to start early. So, in conclusion, what do I want you to remember from this particular talk? When it comes to sort of trying to work out whether your platform is bloating, remember that it's not just about how much code or tooling that you are implementing. It's also about how much friction are you creating and introducing for your end user. Sometimes the indicators are subtle, and so you need to keep your eyes peeled for this. But when we look behind the scenes, underpinning everything, you tend to find that if you have a lack or an absence of vision, planning, and pruning, your systems will drift towards complexity and it will land up bloating. Which is why when it comes to addressing bloat, you want to start early. Prevention is better than cure. And really, at the end, I would just say you need to stay patient and don't give up. So there are generally no one-off quick fixes to try and address this, and your platforms will need constant evolution and hand-holding and sort of TLC as you go along. But if you have some good planning with this, you will hopefully be able to get to the point where you try and keep it as lean as possible. And with that, the end. Thank you very much.